The Renaissance of the 15th century could have said to have had a single battle cry, ad fontes, back to the sources. And the thinkers of this time period saw themselves as emerging from centuries of backwardness, of Gothic ignorance, and the obscurantism of the scholastic schoolmen. Their solution was to seek out primordial wisdom at its varied source in the revelation in hallowed antiquity. Thus, the mad dash to recover works of primeval knowledge, from the salvific wisdom of the Egyptian sage Hermes Trismegistus, to the mystical mathematics of Pythagoras, to the supernatural powers ascribed to Zoroaster. In their reasoning, what was most ancient was closest to that divine revelation itself, and thus most and foundationally true. The aim was nothing short of a total renovation of knowledge itself, famously from art, architecture, and philosophy, but also a renovation of spiritual life, of religion, and even of the practice of magic. The last quarter of the 15th century would witness true innovation, or renovation as they would have had it, in the theory and practice of magic in Europe. Here, Platonic, Orphic, Hermetic, and the most recent infusion of that time, Kabbalistic works, would fuse together in the thought of Ficino, Pico, and Bruno before being exported north of the Alps, where they would be taken up by the genius of Cornelius Agrippa in his foundational Summa of Magical Theory and Practice, the 3 books of occult philosophy, or by people like Dr. John Dee, whose curious combination of medieval Solomonic and astral magic and the new magical philosophies would fuse together to produce the famed Enochian system of magic. But one of the key links in that chain of transmission and innovation was the 15th/16th century humanist Johann Reuchlin, whose development and systemization of Kabbalah would serve to link the innovations of the South with the scholars in the North. Indeed, in his 1494 De Verbo Mirifico, the wonder-working word, and his later 1517 De Arte Kabbalistica, or On the Art of Kabbalah, laid the very foundation for occult forms of Kabbalah outside of the specifically traditional Jewish context, and paved the way for not only Agrippa, but also the eventual rise of the Hermetic Kabbalah centuries later. As part of a collaboration with Dr. Dan Atrell, aka the Modern Hermeticist, I'll be covering the still untranslated 1494 De Verbo Mirifico, or the Wonder-Working Word, which argues for a wholly new form of magic based on what he called Soloquia, on the divinely infused power of divine names. Dr. Atrell, on the other hand, will be covering the later 1517 De Arte Kabbalistica, both works being foundational for the development of non-Jewish Kabbalah and the development of the theory and practice of modern Western magic. So make sure to check out both episodes. And if you're interested in magic, Hermetic philosophy, alchemy, Kabbalah, or the history of the occult, make sure to subscribe and check out my other content on topics in esotericism, including curated playlists on all of these topics. Also, if you want to support my work of providing accessible, scholarly, and free content on topics in esotericism here on YouTube for free, I'd hope you consider supporting my work on Patreon, perhaps with a one-time donation, or you can use the nifty super thanks option down there below the video. But now, let's turn to Johann Reuchlin's 1494 De Verbo Mirifico, or the Wonder-Working Word. I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. As I mentioned in the introduction, many domains of human knowledge were undergoing vast shifts through the Italian Renaissance. Included among them, though not often getting the attention they deserve, as is usual with topics in esotericism, are the truly tectonic shifts in the theory and practice of magic as a key component of Western Christian spiritual life. Yeah, magic and Christianity sat relatively comfortably in a weird way. With Ficino's vast translation projects of especially Platonic, Neoplatonic, Orphic, and Hermetic sources, along with Pico's daring attempt to extract the fundamental truths from all previous domains of philosophy, most notably his inclusion of recently translated Kabbalistic sources, novel forms of religious spirituality began to emanate, one could say, from that Florentine milieu. But both Ficino and Pico, for their many similarities and differences, did share a common contempt for the forms of magical practice that they saw around them, what they called modern, though I think we'd see them as primarily medieval in nature. These were forms of Solomonic and astral magic in which demonic or otherwise supernatural beings were bound and controlled through incantations, the use of ritual furniture, cool costumes, binding sigils, and so on. Basically the world of medieval necromancy as captured in texts like the Munich Necromancer's Manual or the scores of other Solomonic grimoires. Both Ficino and Pico, among others at the time, sought a complete break with these forms of magic, what they saw as an extension of the debased backwardness of the centuries prior. And now, to aid in this renovation of magic, they sought to restore the practice of magic by an appeal to the recently recovered ancients, whom they felt had access to a more primal and thus pure spiritual wisdom and practice. Along with Platonic, Neoplatonic, Orphic, and Hermetic sources, Pico would famously first introduce to the Christian world more generally the Jewish esoteric teachings of the Kabbalah. Indeed, Pico would place a fused Kabbalah and magic at the very pinnacle of his program for the renovation of philosophy and religious practice, even shockingly arguing, that no science more truly assures us of the divinity of Christ than magic and Kabbalah, and that, quote, no magic was efficacious unless supported by the Kabbalah. Both of these theses earned him, unsurprisingly, direct accusations of heresy, and as Dr. Atrell informed me, his conclusions were among the first, if not the first book to ever be put on the Index Prohibitorum, the list of banned books by the Catholic Church. That's how scandalous this idea was. They are among the first truly banned books of the period. Now, these radical ideas would be further developed in Pico's Heptapolis, or his Discourse on the 7 Days of Creation, though his likely assassination at the age of only 31 forestalled their more mature development and their dissemination. However, while Pico wouldn't live to carry that mission forward, in many ways it would be Johann Reuchlin that would not only develop this relationship between magic and Kabbalah, but also transport these ideas across the Alps, from the southern Italian milieu to the north of Europe, where they would truly flourish in the development of modern occult philosophy, beginning really in the 16th century. Reuchlin, one of the great humanists of his era, had already made himself a fine scholarly reputation by the time he had met Ficino and Pico in the early 1490s as part of some of his diplomatic missions. He would go on to receive copies of their works and a translation of Plotinus made by Ficino, this is the Enneads of course, along with studying Hebrew around 1492. Reuchlin would also go on to champion Hebrew education and valiantly sparred with reactionaries who sought to destroy Jewish learned books in an effort for their mass conversion. Indeed, it's hard to overstate just how progressive Reuchlin was in this respect. Recall that at the same time Reuchlin is taking up Hebrew and Kabbalistic learning, the Jews of Iberia are facing the genocidal effects of the Alhambra decree, which expelled hundreds of thousands of people from that region. The Talmud and other Jewish books are being actively burned in his German homeland and in other places, and all the while, Reuchlin is arguing forcefully for toleration and respect for Jewish people and Jewish learning, all the while still holding dearly to what he takes to be the truths of Christianity. He's constantly accused of being a Judaizer, and yet Reuchlin never abandons his commitment to the truth of Catholicism. And it's in that truly dynamic context, the 1492 Alhambra Decree, the early publication of Kabbalistic text, his studying of Hebrew and Kabbalah, and this radical fusion of magic in Kabbalah in the works of people like Pico, that Reuchlin will compose and publish De Verbo Mirifico, or the Wonder-Working Word, in 1494, one of the earliest texts of non-Jewish Kabbalah, and one which introduces a truly novel theory of magic on just that foundation. De Verbo Mirifico, or the Wonder-Working Word, is a book in dialogue form meant to be popular education, which seeks to renovate philosophy and generate a new mode of magical practice through the development of what Reuchlin will call Soloquia, or the use of a single divinely infused word, which reunites human beings with the divine and allows the divine power to flow through them, thus allowing them to transform reality as a conduit of the divine will. The introduction of the text establishes that the book will deal specifically with the, quote, abstruse energies of the utterance and the, quote, divine characters of secret names, which are, he says, most full of wonderful effects. Indeed, in the notes, he says that the most ancient and thus the most pure forms of the wonder-working word, what we might call magic, although he wants to distinguish it from magic, such as those performed by the Pythagoreans, the Hebrews, and the Orphic hymns, along with primitive Christianity, all share in common their use of such operative utterances and divine characters. Thus, for Reuchlin, in all those forms of magic share in a common pool of power, and then Reuchlin, in classical Renaissance style, seeks to discover the singular ground for all such practices, and thus the truly divine power in its purest and most powerful form. Thus, the dialogue in 3 books is between Capnion, a not-so-disguised Reuchlin himself, but Reuchius, a Jew with some knowledge of the Kabbalah, and Sidonius, the skeptical foil of a poor Epicurean philosopher. This guy is the straw man and the whipping child of the book. Over the course of the 3 books, many of the ideas found originally in Pico that I just mentioned about the power of Hebrew, Kabbalah, and magic are integrated at length until finally in Book 3, Reuchlin reveals the singularly powerful wonder-working word he takes to be the singular locus of the onto-semiotic reform of both philosophy and magic. Book 1 lays out the epistemological problems at the very heart of the philosophical and magical Reformation imagined by Reuchlin. It kind of even predates Descartes in this respect. Can we have sure philosophical knowledge of matters both terrestrial, say in physical reality, and in the divine realm or the realm of metaphysics? Of course, this would also encompass what we now call science and religion, and the backdrop here is Reuchlin's attitude toward medieval philosophy, that it's basically, well, degenerated into obscurantist nonsense, a position held by lots of people at this time. What follows are the respective parties tracing out how, at least in ancient times, the Phoenicians, the ancient Greeks, and the ancient Hebrews did have sophisticated knowledge of both terrestrial and metaphysical realms, from the miraculous Phoenician development of navigation and the investigation and development of their letters, to the divine revelation to the Hebrews, and of course the mathematical and philosophical developments of Pythagoras and other illuminated Greek people. But here our Epicurean skeptic interjects that, well, ethics is simply custom-made law by convention. Metaphysical matters are really truly beyond human speculation, and that the only study that really generates facts, as we might call them, is physics. Even then, the frailty of the human mind and human senses, along with the flux of nature, certainly prevents infallible knowledge. I mean, we live in a world of becoming. How can you ever know anything about a world of becoming? While Reuchius concedes this point, he counter-argues that with divine aid, such as, direct revelation from God, such as the Hebrews allegedly had, this assistance of quasi-divine spirits, like the one that Socrates had, the daemon of Socrates that informed him of things behind the veil, one can have just such knowledge in ethics, physics, and metaphysics. In fact, he counters, the Jewish people have just such hidden esoteric revelation. The Kabbalah, a system which he argues perfects ethics, physics, and metaphysics. And again, don't forget for a second, this is the 1490s, and very, very few people outside of elite Jewish circles have ever really even heard of the Kabbalah. This revelation that the Jews have secret esoteric doctrines going back to antiquity would have been downright provocative, if not entirely shocking, to the readers of this book. So with that Kabbalistic mic dropped, Kapnion or Reuchlin interjects that while it's impossible for a human to imagine crossing the gulf between the infinite and the finite, God can certainly do so. In fact, that act is the very divine love through which God seeks to reunite with human beings, but also through which divine power can flow into the world via human beings as miracles or wonders, as we might have it, maybe even as we might think of it as magic. Yes, Baruchias agrees, but confesses that even with the power of the Kabbalah, such an ability to work wonders it's been lost among the Hebrews, much less among the pagan Greeks and the Romans. Surely they couldn't even compete with Christianity in the end, though it surely existed in the ancient world. Kapnion now sets the stage for the rest of the dialogue. Yes, indeed, such power did exist in the past, and it was originally revealed to the Hebrews via Moses through direct divine revelation. Further, everyone that truly worked wonders had access to what he calls these Mosaic vestiges, but only with the final revelation of the incarnated Word, that'd be JC, can this true power be truly renovated and finally unlocked in all of its salvific transformatory strength. But here both the Jewish person and the Epicurean skeptic interject. What about all those who wield power via the magical arts alone, without reference to this wonder-working word? And here follows Reuchlin's sustained attack on what he calls the triflers in the magical arts, or the moderns and their magic. Of course, by the moderns, he means medieval grimoire practitioners, basically. This attack takes three main points. The first is that all those works ascribed to ancient philosophers such as Pythagoras or Hermes Trismegistus or King Solomon for that matter, they're just forgeries containing, if anything, just means by which to interact with evil demonic entities. Further, these texts, and even singles out here the Heptameron attributed to Abano and the Picatrix, well, they're hopelessly corrupt through centuries of miscopying, such that even if the magic did work in the remote past, it certainly won't now. It's just too corrupt. And finally, these modern operators could only perform the magic if every single detail of those texts were copied out correctly and completely, which they aren't. And the Magus could account for every single detail of astrological alignments and this and that, which they can't. In other words, the grimoire magic of the centuries prior are taken to be either fraudulent, demonic, or hopelessly corrupt, or probably, as Reuchlin has it, some combination of all three. As Book 1 concludes, Reuchlin has argued for the need of a renovated philosophy in magic by appealing to a primeval source for the efficacy of the true wonder-working power of the divine words from the remote past, which were delivered by direct divine revelation. Back to the horse's always mouth. But to reveal such a word, he argues that Sidonius must abandon his feckless Epicureanism and Baruchias must dispense with his reliance on the Talmud. And further, as evening falls on the first day of their conversation, he initiates them into what he calls the arcane academy of names through quasi-religious mystical hymns and admonitions to faith, silence, and purity, and with night closing in, a ritually inopportune time to announce the true wonder-working word, he concludes for the day. And with that first day spent generally laying out the philosophical and spiritual problems, the second day is going to be spent discussing the field of magic more generally, along with the wonder-working words more generally themselves, which all goes into developing the theoretical foundations for the nature of this novel magic of the wonder-working world. Discussions just how such words have actually been infused with divine power at all. This was actually a critique levied against Pico bar Garcias, and Reuchlin's going to take up the mantle here, along with discussing various divine names, especially the foundation of the wonder-working word in the ineffable four-letter name of the Israelite God, Yod He Vav He. Reuchlin admits of three species of marvels, those of the physical world, like the phoenix rising from the ashes, those of the astrological world, both signs in the heavens, but also the predictions therefrom, and magic, including both theurgy and goetia, or magic from divine sources and angels in the first respect, and magic resulting from interactions with binding demons in the second respect. Of course, those wonders in physics can be affected just via natural philosophy, what we would now call science. We can do all kinds of miraculous things with science these days. Astrology isn't to be trusted, according to Reuchlin, on both theological and mathematical grounds. This is a point shared basically with Pico. In goetic magic, well, we've covered that already. Well, even theurgy, by the way. Theurgy is rejected by Reuchlin. The invocation of angels is perilous, to say the least, he argues, in the notion that the divine power could be compelled or coerced in any way, much less drawn down into statues, is taken to be patently ridiculous. It's worth noting here that Reuchlin's critique of theurgy is directly aimed at the Hermetica, at Hermes Trismegistus, specifically the infamous sections on the statue animation found in the Asclepius. For Reuchlin, even the great and ancient sage Hermes Trismegistus degenerated and became corrupt in his use of this wonder-working power. No, the wonder-working word operates through direct relationship of divine love. It directly inspires the mind of the magus, through which the use of the word allows a flow of divine energy to transform the world. The purity and faith of the inspired opens up the conduit through which divine power flows into the mind and is effective as speech through the magus via divine power directly. No angels, no demons, no talismans, no magic circles. The unifying power of divine love as enacted through speech and evidenced by its ability to transform the physical and metaphysical worlds. That's it. This form of magic, employing the wonder-working world, as much as he likes to call it magic, which he doesn't, is termed Soloquia. One gains it through knowing the wonder-working word, which we won't learn about until the third book, but it is effective only through purging oneself of sin, coming to the mature age of 25, laying prostrate in silent meditation to allow the divine flow, or the sea of goodness as he has it, to pour into one's mind, along with metered hymns of praise in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. Much of these techniques, by the way, are actually taken from Ficino's use of mystical music, the Hermetic Christian hymns of Ludovico Lazzarelli, and the contemplative techniques long used in both Jewish and Christian circles. Through purity, meditative silence, and the unitive praise, the human mind becomes open to receiving the divine flow, such that the links between God as spirit, the word of what inspires, and the human being as the one inspired, that human being becomes unified in the divine and thus becomes a conduit for divine power itself. It's only in this illuminated, even quasi-deified state that the power of the divine names and the wonder-working word transform from just mere letters and sounds to the operative power of the divine itself, immanent in the world through the working of the magus. Okay, but what are these divinely powerful words? These words so radically infused with divine power that they maintain their inherent metaphysical force. Well, even the ancients agreed that the Greek language had no power in this regard. Its letters were derivative from the Phoenician alphabet. Even Iamblichus argued that the Greek love of novelty meant that the ancient Greeks conserved nothing, really, of the ancient true wisdom. And even the Hermetica complains that the dissolute speech of the Greeks lacks the energy required for working real theurgic magic. Of course, Reuchlin invokes here the tradition of the Barbara Verba, or the barbarous words, that populated the magic of the ancient world, from the spells of the Greek magical papyri to their defense in Iamblichus, and even by Pico in his conclusions. He would argue that simply their meaning not being known gives them all the more power. But again, what were these mysterious, powerful words? And it's here that Reuchlin insists on the Mosaic priority in his theory of the Prisca Theologia. It was Moses, in his direct revelation from the divine, that first received written language itself and the words of divine power in which these wonder-working words were first revealed. This magical technology, or those Mosaic vestiges, were then diffused throughout the world, from to the Phoenicians, to the Gymnosophists of India, to even the Druids among the Celts. Though, of course, in various states of corruption until they so degraded that they ceased to function at all. With the possible exception, interestingly enough, of Orpheus, who did seem to have a unique divine revelation all to himself among the non-Hebrews. But this tradition of divinely powerful names was only in many ways kept alive via the Kabbalists. Though with the coming of the incarnate Word of God in the form of Jesus the Christ, even this tradition eventually failed to produce further wonders, explaining why Boruchius has to admit that even among the Kabbalists doesn't work anymore. Though even the writers of the New Testament recognize the power of divine speech from the God-man Jesus of Nazareth, who could expel demons in the name of Jesus, the apostles could, and even they recorded some of the original Aramaic of his speech in the Greek language, in the Greek letters, in the depictions of his life, teachings, execution, and resurrection. It's fascinating that we actually have little chunks of Aramaic in the Greek of the New Testament. Thus, even the powerful barbarous words were originally Hebrew, and such powerful Hebrew words were further disseminated through the mystery schools of the ancient world, but only maintained, though deficient since the Messianic breakthrough, in the form of the Kabbalah. For Reuchlin, then, the task was to retrieve these words of power and fully enact their power through the sign of the cross and the metaphysical linguistic implications of the incarnation of the second person of the Trinity in the flesh. But first, to the first part of that, to the Kabbalah and the powerful names of God revealed to the ancient Hebrews. While Reuchlin focuses on various special names in the Hebrew Bible, such as Ehyeh, like Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, the Greek equivalent of Toon, or that which is, or being, to the name Hu, or that one, the one most hidden aspect of the divine, to the divine fire, or Aish, which is the outer appearance of the divine in the world. In fact, these three names, by the way, for Reuchlin represent the Christian Trinity, a common trope in Christian Kabbalah. Further, Reuchlin introduces one of the earliest discussions of the divine names as associated with the Sephirotic tree of life for the first time, really in Latin in many ways, from the sublimely hidden Keter, or the crown, through the other 9 vestments of the divine, through which blessings flow to our world, the world of Malchut. But the most attention given in the text is to the ineffable 4-letter name of the divine, Yod He Vav He, or IHUH, as Reuchlin has it transliterated in his book. This name of the divine, first revealed to the patriarchs, though lacking in true power, but then fully revealed to Moses with its true power concealed in the Kabbalah, is the very founding mathematics of the Pythagoreans and holds the mysteries of the Tetrachus. Further, it contains the unity and plurality of all things, the essence and procession of the divine, the semi-divine place of the human being in the cosmic plan, united actually in this case with Kabbalistic notions with those found in the Hermetica as human beings as being a kind of miracle unto themselves and a second God. For Reuchlin, the Tetragrammaton fully captured and expressed all physical and metaphysical wisdom from the beginning of the cosmos was made truly powerful in the time of Moses. It went on to work wonders in the Hebrew Bible and beyond, along with the other names in the mystery schools of the ancient world, but remained incomplete until the incarnation of the divine Logos in the final revelation of Christ. Of course, it's in that final revelation, the true ontological completion of reality, with the realm of the divine and the realm of the human being completely united in the person of Jesus of Nazareth, that the mystery of the final form of the wonder-working Word is revealed in Book 3. According to Reuchlin, the full potential of the name Yod-He-Vav-He, or IHUH, remained just beyond the reach of humankind for both metaphysical and linguistic reasons. But with the final coming of Christ, a last Hebrew letter, a consonant, is inserted into the center of the otherwise purely vowel Tetragrammaton, thus rendering it fully pronounceable as a Pentagrammaton. That Hebrew letter represents the divine fire brought to earth, the teeth as the point of articulation, and the mouth for language itself, the seventh age of the cosmos, and the oil of the divine lamp, which shines forth for all humankind, anointing the mind, allowing it to receive true divine power. That final letter is the Hebrew letter Shin, placed like a keystone of an arch into the Tetragrammaton, right in the middle, and finally revealed the whispered tones and ritual power, the name IHSHUH, which is both the most powerful magical word which unlocks the divine flow and power, but also the love and the esoteric spelling of the name of Christ himself. This is the name that has the power to expel demons, to create wine from water, to tread upon water, to cause earthquakes, even repel pirates. It's in there, I'm not kidding. Further, this name, Reuchlin tells us, is the great stone of the philosophers, that one capable of transmuting any base metal into perfection. So we get some alchemy in here, it's this word and the reformed magical practice of Soloquia, which will surpass all magic, reform all philosophy, and provide direct access to the divine, by which the divinized human being will unite with the divine love, and through which divine power will flow in the transformation of all reality. Though, just as it seems that Reuchlin is about to tell us the practical side of how to use this wonder-working world IHSHUH, the reader is shut out of the conversation, with Capnion declaring to us that it is not proper to spread these veiled arcana and the most secret symbols into the air, but to whisper them directly into the ear. The final text concludes with a ritual initiation where Sidonius and Baruchius receive a kind of baptism via breath, as if by the Holy Spirit, and are bidden to silence, to hiding and keeping secret this final powerful word, but also to worship this Verbum Mirificium, this wonder-working word. Though just as Reuchlin's De Verbo Mirifico is a further systematization and explanation of the magical and Kabbalistic conclusions found in Pico's conclusions, the more practical side of Reuchlin's overall philosophy will be taken up, I think, by none less than Agrippa in his monumental 3 books of occult philosophy. In fact, in the so-called juvenile draft of that text from 1510, recall that it was officially published in 1533, Agrippa uses ample and substantial quotations from Reuchlin's De Verbo Mirifico. In fact, we even know that Agrippa taught an entire university-level course on the De Verbo in 1509 in Burgundy. Thus, by the first draft of the 3 books written down in 1510, his knowledge of this text would have been profound and its influence rather ubiquitous. In fact, if you look at the 1510 draft, Reuchlin's all over it. Thus, if Pico's conclusions are a kind of cliffhanger for our understanding, we turn to Reuchlin. And if Reuchlin's De Verbo is a cliffhanger for their practice, we turn to Agrippa's 3 books, because while the centrality of a single powerful word isn't necessarily his thesis, virtually everything else in Reuchlin's ideas are, and such powerful names do in fact play a central role in his occult philosophy. Indeed, the same could be said for Dr. John Dee, who was also a close reader of Reuchlin. In fact, the De Verbo may have been the major thing he would have read prior to his composition of his 1564 Monos Hieroglyphica, which follows nearly the same Kabbalistic program, though with a symbol and not a single word. The monas is the symbol there. In this way, Reuchlin deserves to be appreciated as both a profound expositor of the theoretical innovations around magic and Kabbalah of the Florentine Renaissance, but also one of the key links in the chain that transfers, adapts, and innovates such theories into Northern Europe, thus propelling such thinking into occult modernity. Of course, De Verbo wouldn't be Reuchlin's last or even most mature work on Kabbalah. His 1517 De Arta Kabbalistica, covered by Dr. Jan Trell, the modern Hermeticist, over on his channel as the companion for this episode, represents a much deeper understanding of both the Hebrew language, but also the theosophical speculations at the very heart of traditional Kabbalah, and how they can be brought to bear to defend a reformed vision of Christianity itself, a kind of Hermetic, Kabbalistic form of Christianity. While Reuchlin would never leave Catholicism or become Protestant, his views on faith, ecumenical Christianity, and toleration, indeed his appreciation towards Jewish people, would prefigure the rise of much in the way of the kind of modernity that we admire as social and moral progress. But sadly, there's no English translation of Reuchlin's De Verbo Mirifico, and even the edition of De Arte Kabbalistica isn't without pretty serious flaws, in my opinion. In fact, there are no sustained monograph-sized studies of Reuchlin's thought and its incredibly important and unique contributions to the history of Western esotericism at the time of the production of this episode. That's just a project for someone to do. But the most sustained study of De Verbo is the groundbreaking article by Charles Zika, which is now 50 years old. That's when the ground was broke on this stuff, 50 years ago in many ways, so we need to catch up. Though it's a wonderful article and it greatly facilitated the possibility of this episode. But despite the publication of profound studies of Ficino, Pico, Agrippa, and the cottage industry of John Dee analysis, Reuchlin remains understudied, and thus his impact and genius remain underappreciated to this day. It's a real tragedy. So there's always work to do down in the esoterica mines. Again, make sure to check out the Modern Hermeticist companion and sequel to this episode. And until next time, I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and thank you for watching Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion.